countries, those 12 countries that supported the UN resolution condemning settlements in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. This as tension worsens between Israel and the United States. Joining me now is David Keyes. He is the spokesperson for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thanks for being with us, David.
Thanks for having me.
Last night on this network, you said that the Israeli government, has, quote, ironclad information from sources in the Arab world and internationally that there was essentially collusion between the U.S. government, the Obama administration, and those other members of the UN who voted on that resolution that the U.S. abstained on. And you say this is the working of the United States. What is that evidence?
Well, that evidence is going to be presented to the new administration through the proper channels, and they can choose to share that if they'd like. But I can tell you that I myself have seen the information, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that that information exists. And what it shows is that the Obama administration helped craft and push and lobby for this United Nations Security Council resolution, which is so outrageous, and frankly it's an abandonment of a long-standing position of the American administration to protect Israel at the United Nations, this deeply biased body that frankly delights in lambasting the one liberal democracy in the Middle East, and has a lot less time for those hundreds of thousands of civilians killed in places like Syria. This United Nations resolution actually says that the Western Wall, okay, one of the holiest sites to the Jewish people, a place where Jews have been for literally thousands of years, have prayed towards, have lived adjacent to for thousands of years, that somehow is illegally occupied Palestinian land.
David,
that is outrageous, that is ahistorical, and that certainly pushes peace a lot further back.
David, a lot to unpack there. Let's get to multiple parts of it. First, though, it also says, and leaves very open the door for negotiations, and says there will be no changes to the 1967 agreement, quote, other than those agreed to by the parties through negotiations. But to your argument that essentially the American people, the Israeli people, the Obama administration should not see the evidence that you say you have seen with your own eyes, walk me through that logic. Wouldn't it help you more in the court of public opinion to put it forward now?
Well, the court of public opinion is not the only court there is, and like I said, we will pass those through the proper channels. But having seen the information, I can tell you
why is the current administration not? Why is this administration that is in office for the next 24 days not the proper channels?
Well, because this is the administration that was behind the crafting and implementation of the Security Council resolution.
Why not?
They know what they did.
I'm having a hard time understanding the logic that you wouldn't put it out there for the world to see now.
I understand that. Well, 60 Minutes and even great hosts like yourself are not the only calculation in what we decide to divulge or not divulge. But again, this is ironclad, as I said yesterday. I've seen it myself. There's no doubt whatsoever behind it. And frankly, it's deeply, deeply disappointing to the state of Israel, because you have a situation where the Palestinian Authority is frankly paying people who murder Israelis, naming soccer stadiums after mass murderers, refusing to meet with Israel's prime minister after hundreds and hundreds of calls to begin negotiations without any preconditions whatsoever today, here and now. You know, Ramallah is just a few minutes away from here. President Abbas would simply need to come to Jerusalem. The prime minister invited President Abbas to the Knesset. He offered to go to the parliament in Ramallah. And all of our calls for peace and actual negotiations have been turned down. The question is,
so let's talk about the peace process.
And the answer is deceptively simple.
Let's talk about the peace process. We do expect to hear from U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry later this week, laying out his vision, his hopes for what is forward under the next administration. As you well know, in Paris on January 15th, 70 countries will get together for this peace summit. The Palestinians have said they support the conference. As far as we know up until now, unless you will say differently, Israel is not planning to attend. Why?
Well, because what the internationalization of this conflict does is it gives the Palestinians an easy out, not to sit down and make the hard choices. You know, Israel has made peace successfully with Egypt and Jordan, two Arab neighbors of ours, and those peace treaties have lasted for decades.
It has, but it has demanded different things of the Palestinians, as you well know. In the peace accord with Egypt, in the peace treaty with Jordan, Israel did not demand that Israel be recognized as a Jewish state. Same thing when you normalize relations with Turkey. That is a demand, though, in the peace talks with the Palestinians. Why is it different?
Well, it's different because the Palestinian narrative today, unfortunately, is based on the same Palestinian narrative from even several decades ago. And that is that there's no real place in this Middle East for even a tiny Jewish state. And that's why their maps talk about Tel Aviv and Jaffa as settlements, not outposts in the West Bank. That's why they're educating their children that eventually all of this land will be Palestinian. And that's actually what's at the core of this conflict, the persistent Palestinian refusal to accept any Jewish state whatsoever. And if you want proof,
the spokeswoman as you heard the doctor just tell Don Lemon, or if you didn't hear it, she said, we recognize the state. We do not recognize it as a Jewish state. She says there should be a separation of religion from the state. Some are pointing, as you well know, David, to the Palestinians using this UN Security Council resolution perhaps as part of their argument to potentially make a case in the ICC, in the International Criminal Court, against Israeli leaders. Do you believe that is the eventuality of what is that part of what upsets the Netanyahu administration so much about this UN Security Council vote?
Well, I hope it doesn't move in that direction, but it's nice that Hanan Ashrawi comes on CNN and talks about recognition, but you can also quote other advisors like Nabil Shath, who said, and you know, I'll quote it in the original Arabic if you're curious, "Ussat dawlatayn sha'abayn lan naqbal dhalik." 2 states for 2 peoples, we will never accept that. And it's really the 2 peoples part that is the differentiation here, because many leaders like Tawfiq Tirawi, for example, will say, well, of course we want 1 state now, and eventually later we'll have the 2nd state as well. So all of this land will be ours. What a tragedy.
As you know, David
we can't
Friedman,
live at peace with our neighbors because of this horrific incitement.
David Friedman, who the president-elect has tapped to be the ambassador to Israel, has said that he believes that a 2-state solution is more a narrative. He has not been supportive of a 2-state solution. A few more questions I want to get to. The New York Times front page today is reporting that
you can ask him about that, but as the Prime Minister's spokesman, I can tell you that his position is
I understand what Netanyahu's position is.
2 states for 2 peoples living side by side.
I understand that. I'd like to get some clarity on this New York Times front page report this morning, David, and that is that Israel is intending to build 600 new settlements in East Jerusalem, and that is what a top official is telling the New York Times is part of the first installment of 5,600 new settlements there. Is that true?
You know, I think what really needs to be discussed here is not the approval or not approval of a few hundred apartment buildings.
No, but David, that's my question. David, that's my question. Is the New York Times correct in their reporting this morning on that?
I understand, but I just want to make a very quick point, and that is the following. Almost every time I come on television, someone will ask me about a handful of outposts going up, on the presumption that the presence of Jews in Judea is somehow a great barrier to peace. You know, over 1.5 million Arabs live inside of Israel as full citizens. They serve on the Supreme Court, they serve in the Knesset, they've reached the heights of business and the police force, etc., etc. That's not a barrier to peace at all. What that shows is what a pluralistic and open society looks like. And I sincerely hope that one day the basis of a Palestinian state will not have to be that as a precondition, first every Jew must leave that territory. And especially when you add to that the idea that Jerusalem is somehow an occupied place. That's what this UN resolution to get back to the initial
So you will not, and correct me if I'm wrong, confirm the New York Times reporting. Before I let you go, I'll ask you exactly what Don just asked in the last interview, and that is, what do you believe the prospects for peace are under President-elect Trump?
Well, I think that it really depends on the Palestinians. I think American involvement can be a wonderful thing, and hopefully what that means is that they can convince the Palestinians at long last to accept a Jewish state in the Middle East and to cease this diplomatic war against Israel, whereby even an inch of Jewish sovereignty in the Middle East is too much. I'm actually very hopeful about the future. The Middle East is changing in many important ways, but what has to happen in order for peace to come about is that the Palestinian Authority needs to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. It needs to cease paying salaries to people who murder Israelis. It should stop naming soccer soccer stadiums and schools and streets after mass murders, and it should accept Prime Minister Netanyahu's many calls to begin the peace process here and now. Peace is too important, and both Israelis and Palestinians deserve to live in peace with mutual recognition, and I'm very hopeful that in the future that can come about.
David Keyes, we are all hoping for peace. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We are just 24 days away from witnessing history when Donald Trump takes his oath, becoming the 45th president. What can we expect at the inaugural ceremony? We're going to get a sneak peek from a member of the inauguration team next.